Welcome to our Futures presentation. My name is Micah Bowman.
I'm Braden Unsicker.
And I'm Tristan Wright.
Today we will be addressing the question, what does the future hold for Pakistan? Here's a brief overview of what we will talk about today. We will discuss why we think the most likely outcome for Pakistan is an authoritarian state, which is defined as a military taking control over the institutions of Pakistan. We believe that it could become an authoritarian state because of the following events. Number 1, Pakistan has had a history of military coups. Number 2, there has been a lot of corruption within Pakistan and within the government. And number 3, the long-lasting effects of the partition. We'll also be discussing something called the insecurity syndrome.
Chuck Palahniuk, a well-known author and journalist, said, "There are only patterns, patterns on top of patterns, patterns that affect other patterns, patterns hidden by patterns, patterns within patterns. If you watch close, history does nothing but repeat itself." This has been the case for Pakistan. Since its partition in 1947, there have been 4 direct military interventions, as shown on the slide, that have established a pattern. This pattern of government switching back and forth between military rule and democracy will most likely continue to repeat itself. With each new military intervention, there has been an introduction of a new constitution. This highlights Pakistan's tumultuous relationship with its military and the society's inconsistency in rule of law. This inconsistency in rule of law leaves the door wide open for Pakistan's history to repeat itself and enter into another authoritarian state. This also leads to what has been coined as the insecurity syndrome. The Hoover Institute implies that this insecurity syndrome was caused by Pakistan's security deficit that justified the disproportionate share of the state budget to be devoted to defense, thus increasing the armed forces' influence and diverting scarce resources from social and economic projects. The Pakistani army, then, came to have a vested interest in continued hostility, thus rationalizing its claim on public resources. In fact, the Kashmir conflict was a ready-made cauldron that the army had a stake in keeping at a boil. This is still an issue today.
In 1948, after the death of Jinnah, the first war with India had finally ended, and a dispute over territory in Kashmir had military leaders unsuccessfully trying to overthrow the Pakistani government to create territorial reforms. Immediately following, in 1958, martial law was declared and General Khan took over, making amends to the constitution and corrupting much of the rule of law already established by Jinnah for creating peace within the country. Corruption goes as far as bribery and paying off individuals within the Pakistani government to basically do each other's dirty work. This puts little trust in politicians. When there is so much distrust in the government, it has led to major protests and opposition, making it so the military must step in. Pakistan has remained under de facto authoritarian rule for the most part of its existence, although most of the Middle East fears an increase. It has led to the weakening of institutions, including the media, which is harmful from the perspectives of the country's evolution as a true democracy. It is because of this that the country is still struggling to function as a state. Political instability, economic deprivation, and terrorism can be laid at the door of this deficiency in our system. Pakistan acquired this authoritarian state after independence because of the weakness of its policies and its political shams. Following the partition, many different Pakistani leaders held firm that laws would not change following the newest system of government that had been implemented. Little did they know that in the coming decades, overfunding military, change in the rule of law, and corruption would have left a mark on Pakistan and created what some are now calling an authoritarian state. Mass migrations played a huge role in authoritarianism in Pakistan. It was after the partition as millions of Muslims from India began migrating to newly regulated Pakistan. The new government feared overpopulation and poor control over incoming immigrants, and military power exceeded every other for almost a decade. In August of this year, it was reported that Pakistan would be deprived of U.S. aid worth hundreds of millions of dollars over, quote, not doing enough to combat insurgent groups within territories that allegedly planned to coordinate attacks in neighboring Afghanistan and was placing all of their funds in the state. The United States feared they would become an authoritarian state.
Why should I care? We should care because it will greatly affect our relations with Pakistan. Some fear that if Pakistan becomes an authoritarian state, that they will not have the desire to be an ally with the United States. This would directly affect us in a negative way because Pakistan has served us well in providing a front to combat the Taliban and terrorism in the Middle East. We want this continued allegiance with Pakistan, and it could be at risk if they become an authoritarian state. Here's our